You replay that day in your mind, and it never goes away.
Something has happened. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade.
There has been an attempt on the life of President Kennedy.
The assassination of John F. Kennedy has intrigued the world for decades, spawning numerous theories and investigations. As we delve into the intricate web of evidence and conjecture, we uncover various narratives that have shaped the discourse around this pivotal historical event. This video examines the facts, scrutinizes the alleged conspiracies, and presents the key elements that continue to fuel the debate over who really was responsible for the death of the 35th President of the United States. Early investigations and key suspects. The immediate aftermath of President John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22, 1963, set off a frenetic quest for answers. Within hours, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested, not for the assassination itself initially, but for the murder of a police officer, J.D. Tippit, which occurred shortly after Kennedy was shot. It wasn't long before Oswald was also charged with killing the president. Initial investigations focused heavily on Oswald's background. His defection to the Soviet Union in 1959 and subsequent return to the United States in 1962, along with his support of communist Cuba, painted a picture of a man with potential motives rooted in political dissent. Oswald's own assassination 2 days later by nightclub owner Jack Ruby added a layer of complexity and urgency to the investigation, propelling conspiracy theories into the national consciousness. The Warren Commission, established by President Lyndon B. Johnson to investigate the assassination, concluded in 1964 that Oswald acted alone. They posited that 3 shots were fired from the Texas School Book Depository where Oswald had been working, and that one of these bullets was the fatal shot that killed Kennedy. The Commission's findings, detailed in the Warren Report, relied heavily on ballistics evidence, witness testimonies, and Oswald's known Marxist leanings. However, the Commission's report did not satisfy public curiosity. Critics pointed out inconsistencies and potential oversights in the investigation. Questions arose about the trajectory of the bullets and whether one gunman could have inflicted all the injuries to Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally, who was also shot in the attack. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, was established in 1976 to review the original evidence and to investigate further. This inquiry was, in part, prompted by the advancements in forensic science and the emergence of new evidence. The HSCA concluded in 1979 that Kennedy was likely assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, a conclusion that contradicted the Warren Commission's findings. This assertion was based on acoustic evidence from a police officer's radio transmission that suggested a second shooter might have been present on the infamous grassy knoll. Despite the HSCA's findings, skeptics of the lone gunman theory had, even before this, scrutinized other potential suspects and scenarios. These included organized crime figures who were angered by the Kennedy administration's crackdown on the mafia, disaffected anti-Castro Cuban exiles who felt betrayed by Kennedy's failure to overthrow Fidel Castro's regime, and even elements within the U.S. government, such as the CIA, who some theorized could have perceived Kennedy as a threat to national security or military interests, particularly after the Bay of Pigs fiasco and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The list of suspects extended beyond these groups. Some theories implicated foreign governments, while others suggested that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson had a motive to orchestrate a coup d'etat. The Soviet Union and Cuba were also implicated in various theories, given the Cold War, context, and Kennedy's foreign policy initiatives. Each theory pointed to a complex web of potential collusion and motives, ranging from geopolitical strategies to personal vendettas. Lee Harvey Oswald, lone gunman. Lee Harvey Oswald, the enigmatic figure at the center of the Kennedy assassination, was quickly labeled the lone gunman by the Warren Commission. His shadowy past, filled with odd connections and ideological leanings, provided a backdrop for a narrative of a disturbed individual acting on his own. Oswald's life was a patchwork of paradoxes. He was a former Marine who defected to the Soviet Union, only to return disillusioned. His pro-Cuban activism included a public scuffle in New Orleans and the distribution of pro-Castro literature. This activism seemed incongruent with his life as a father and husband, which was marked by instability and financial struggle. Following his arrest, Oswald denied any involvement in the assassination, claiming to be a patsy.
The first thing I heard about it was when the newspaper reporters in the
A statement that has been dissected for its implications ever since.
Well, I was questioned by a judge. However, I protested at that time that I was not allowed.
His murder at the hands of Jack Ruby, captured live on television, only deepened the mystery. Was Ruby silencing Oswald to prevent him from revealing a broader conspiracy, or was it the impulsive act of an outraged citizen? Oswald's guilt seemed clear-cut due to the evidence. His rifle, with his fingerprints, found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, eyewitness accounts of his presence there, and the ballistic matches to the bullet fragments. Yet, doubts lingered. How could Oswald, characterized by some as an average marksman at best, execute such a precise series of shots? The infamous backyard photo showing Oswald with the rifle was claimed by some to be doctored, although investigations consistently authenticated the photograph. The narrative of Oswald as the lone gunman also had to contend with the complexity of the crime itself. The magic bullet theory proposed by the Warren Commission suggested that a single bullet caused 7 wounds to Kennedy and Connolly, a theory that many found hard to accept given the bullet's relatively undamaged state. The trajectory and number of shots fired were also points of contention. The Zapruder film, a key piece of evidence, showed Kennedy reacting to the shots, but interpretations of his movements led to various conclusions. Could Oswald have fired all the shots within the tight time frame? Acoustical evidence analyzed by the HSCA suggested the possibility of a second gunman, reigniting the debate. Further, Oswald's interactions in the months before the assassination attracted attention. His visit to the Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City just weeks before the assassination raised questions about his motives and whether he was seeking support for his actions. The CIA's and FBI's monitoring of Oswald's activities before the assassination introduced the possibility that he was not as isolated as he seemed. The grassy knoll theory. The grassy knoll theory remains one of the most persistent and intriguing aspects of the Kennedy assassination narrative. This theory posits that a second shooter was stationed behind a picket fence on a small, sloping hill in Dealey Plaza, the so-called grassy knoll, and that it was from this position that the fatal headshot was fired. This conjecture is fueled by a combination of eyewitness accounts, acoustic recordings, and photographic evidence that has been scrutinized and contested over the years. Numerous witnesses reported hearing shots from the direction of the grassy knoll, and some claimed to have seen smoke or flashes of light from behind the fence. These testimonies conflict with the official account that all shots were fired by Oswald from the Texas School Book Depository. The acoustic evidence analyzed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, added scientific weight to this theory. Sound impulses recorded on a police officer's dictabelt were interpreted as gunshots, with the timing and directionality consistent with a second shooter on the knoll. However, subsequent analyses have challenged the HSCA's findings, arguing that the sounds could have originated from sources unrelated to gunfire, such as motorcycle backfires or echoes. Photographic evidence has also been at the center of the grassy knoll debate. The much-dissected Zapruder film does not conclusively show a second shooter, but the film's grainy quality and the angles of the frames have led to various interpretations. Other photographs taken around the time of the assassination depict figures on the knoll, but their quality and the chaotic nature of the event have made positive identification impossible. The presence of suspicious individuals in Dealey Plaza has been frequently cited by proponents of the grassy knoll theory. The so-called badge man photograph, which appears to show a figure wearing a badge firing a weapon, has been both supported as evidence of a second shooter and debunked as a trick of light and shadow. Similarly, the umbrella man, a bystander holding an open umbrella near the motorcade route, has been the subject of speculation, with some suggesting that the umbrella could have been a signal or even a weapon. The physical environment of Dealey Plaza also supports the possibility of a second shooter. The acoustic properties of the plaza, with its buildings and landscaping, could have created an auditory illusion regarding the direction of the shots. The grassy knoll with its covering fence and foliage provided a location for a potential assassin to remain concealed and to have an unobstructed view of the president's motorcade. The grassy knoll theory has also raised questions about the aftermath of the shooting. Witnesses reported a man being stopped by police officers near the knoll, but then allowed to leave after producing Secret Service credentials. However, the real Secret Service agents were accounted for elsewhere at the time of the assassination, leading to suspicions about impersonators or rogue elements within the government. Organized crime connections. The possible involvement of organized crime in the assassination of President Kennedy has been a subject of speculation and investigation since the tragic event in 1963. The connection between Kennedy's death and the Mafia stems from a confluence of historical facts and circumstantial evidence that suggest potential motives for mob involvement. The Mafia's discontent with the Kennedy administration can be traced back to the 1960 election, where it was rumored that they had provided support to secure votes in crucial states. Despite this alleged assistance, the Kennedy administration, particularly under Attorney General Robert Kennedy, initiated an unprecedented crackdown on organized crime. This aggressive pursuit of mob figures could have been perceived as a betrayal, fueling a vendetta against the president. Furthermore, the mob had significant interests in Cuba before Castro's communist regime took power. The revolution had cost the Mafia valuable casinos and investments, and there was a belief that Kennedy's failure to overthrow Castro in the Bay of Pigs invasion meant the loss of their Cuban enterprises was permanent. Some theories suggest that the Mafia hoped a change in the presidency might result in a foreign policy shift that would allow them to regain their lost operations. Key Mafia figures like New Orleans mob boss Carlos Marcello, Florida crime boss Santo Trafficante, and Chicago syndicate leader Sam Giancana have been linked to various conspiracy theories. These men had the means and the motive to plot an assassination, and their disdain for the Kennedys was well documented. Marcello reportedly expressed a desire to kill the president, and Giancana had connections to the CIA through shared interests in removing Castro from power. The Mafia's modus operandi, with its emphasis on silence and loyalty, meant that any involvement in the assassination would be carefully concealed. However, there were hints of connections, such as Jack Ruby's links to organized crime. Ruby's murder of Oswald was seen by some as a move to silence the accused assassin and prevent any mob connections from being revealed. Ruby's own unconvincing explanations for his actions only added to the suspicion. Several individuals associated with organized crime were known to have had indirect contact with Oswald, leading to conjecture that Oswald could have been used as a patsy or willing participant in a larger scheme orchestrated by the Mafia. David Ferry, a figure with connections to both Marcello and Oswald, died under mysterious circumstances before he could be thoroughly questioned. His death was one of several that conspiracy theorists cite as a pattern of convenient fatalities that protected the secrecy of a mob conspiracy. The HSCA, in its investigation, acknowledged the possibility of mob involvement. While they found no direct evidence linking organized crime to the assassination, they did concede that individuals with mob connections had the motive and opportunity to carry out the crime. The committee's final report highlighted the inadequacy of the methods used by earlier investigations to evaluate the mob's potential role. Political conspiracy theories. The narrative of political conspiracy in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy encompasses a labyrinth of theories implicating various elements of the U.S. government and other national interests. These conjectures suggest that Kennedy's progressive policies and independent decision-making might have unsettled powerful entities enough to conspire against him. One prevalent theory involves the military-industrial complex. Kennedy's apparent reluctance to fully engage the United States in the escalating conflict in Vietnam and his signing of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty are cited as potential motives for defense contractors and hawkish military leaders to desire his removal. His moves towards de-escalation of Cold War tensions, a direction contrary to the profit and ideology-driven objectives of some military and industrial sectors, add layers to this suspicion. Another theory implicates the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Kennedy's reaction to the Bay of Pigs invasion's failure, which included the firing of CIA Director Allen Dulles, bred contention. His subsequent endeavors to curtail the CIA's power and his back-channel negotiations with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev for peace were viewed unfavorably by hardliners within the agency. This discontent, according to some theorists, could have led to a CIA-sponsored assassination plan. The vice presidency also enters the realm of speculation, with theories suggesting that Lyndon B. Johnson had a hand in orchestrating Kennedy's death to ascend to the presidency. Though evidence to support such a claim is circumstantial at best, proponents argue that Johnson's ambition and powerful political connections made him a plausible conspirator. Theories also extend to the Federal Reserve because of Kennedy's alleged monetary policy intentions, particularly regarding Executive Order 11110, which authorized the U.S. Treasury to issue silver certificates. This move is sometimes interpreted as an attempt to diminish the Federal Reserve's control over the money supply, thereby posing a direct threat to its power and inviting retribution. Critics of the official narrative often point to the Warren Commission's investigation and conclusion of a lone gunman as being too simplistic, accusing it of being a government-led cover-up designed to pacify the public while concealing the true complexity of the assassination. The subsequent sealing of investigation records and classified documents bolstered these suspicions, with the slow drip of information release over the years feeding the fire of conjecture. These political conspiracy theories are born from a broader context of distrust in governmental transparency and accountability, a sentiment that was particularly potent during the turbulent 1960s. They reflect the anxiety and skepticism of the times, embodying the fears of a public grappling with rapid social and political change and a profound loss of innocence following Kennedy's death. The theories are as varied as they are controversial, with some suggesting that Kennedy's efforts to end segregation and promote civil rights played a part in his assassination, angering segregationists and Southern political structures. Others propose international angles, including Cold War adversaries or exiled Cuban groups who felt betrayed by Kennedy's policies, the role of the CIA and FBI, the role of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy has been the subject of intense speculation and numerous conspiracy theories. Given their extensive surveillance capabilities and involvement in high-level operations, both agencies have been scrutinized for their actions before and after the assassination, as well as their potential motivations for involvement. The CIA, with its covert operations and history of involvement in regime change, has often been cited by conspiracy theorists as a possible player in the assassination. The agency had experienced a fractious relationship with Kennedy, particularly after the Bay of Pigs invasion, which had soured Kennedy on the CIA's effectiveness and trustworthiness. Kennedy's subsequent moves to reduce the power of the CIA and his pursuit of back-channel negotiations for peace with the Soviet Union and Cuba were seen by some within the agency as undermining its core mission during the Cold War.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
Adding to the suspicion was the presence of CIA operatives in Dallas on the day of the assassination and the agency's known monitoring of Lee Harvey Oswald during his visits to the Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City just weeks prior to the assassination. The CIA's reticence to fully disclose its files on Oswald and the assassination has further fueled theories that the agency was either involved in the event or had knowledge of a looming threat against the president that it failed to act upon. The FBI, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, also had a complicated relationship with Kennedy. The Bureau had been conducting surveillance on Oswald since his return from the Soviet Union, and it had received a warning of a potential threat against the president before November 22, 1963. The FBI's rapid conclusion that Oswald was the lone gunman and the apparent lack of thoroughness in following up on potential leads have led to suspicions that the Bureau was covering up its own intelligence failures, or, more sinisterly, its involvement. Theories concerning the FBI suggest that Hoover's dislike of the Kennedys, combined with his desire to maintain the status quo against the perceived liberal agenda of the Kennedy administration, might have motivated a concealment of the Bureau's full knowledge of the events leading up to the assassination. Hoover's FBI was known for its secret political surveillance and manipulation, which included efforts to discredit civil rights leaders and other activists seen as threats to national stability. The HSCA's investigation into the assassination acknowledged that both the CIA and FBI had failed to share crucial information with one another and with other agencies, which could have potentially prevented Kennedy's death. While this was officially ascribed to institutional incompetence and interagency rivalry, it has been interpreted by some as evidence of a more deliberate obstruction. Forensic evidence and ballistic studies. Forensic evidence and ballistic studies have been at the heart of the investigation into President Kennedy's assassination, providing crucial information about the number of shots fired, their trajectory, and the origins of the bullets. This scientific scrutiny has both reinforced and challenged the official account provided by the Warren Commission that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman. The Commission's conclusion was largely based on the analysis of the bullet trajectories and the so-called magic bullet theory. This theory posited that a single bullet, fired from Oswald's rifle, caused multiple injuries to Kennedy and Governor John Connally, who was seated in front of the president. Ballistic experts pointed to the alignment of the sixth-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, the location from where Oswald allegedly fired, with the wounds on the victims. However, critics have argued that the trajectory of the bullet was too complex for a single bullet to account for all the injuries, suggesting the possibility of a second shooter. The nature of the wounds themselves was a subject of extensive forensic debate. Kennedy's head wound suggested an entry from the rear and an exit from the front, consistent with the Warren Commission's findings. However, the controversy over the direction of the shot was fueled by the Zapruder film, which appeared to show Kennedy's head moving backward, prompting some to argue that the fatal shot came from in front of the motorcade. The condition of the so-called magic bullet also raised questions. Found on a stretcher at Parkland Memorial Hospital, the bullet was in relatively pristine condition, which some found inconsistent with the damage such a projectile would have sustained had it traversed two bodies and struck bone. This led to speculation that the bullet had been planted as part of a cover-up. Ballistic studies conducted during subsequent investigations, including those by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, revisited the evidence and introduced the possibility of additional shots based on acoustic analysis. These studies suggested that a shot could have originated from the grassy knoll, though this was later contested by other experts who claimed the acoustic signatures were misinterpreted. Advancements in forensic technology have allowed for more sophisticated analysis of the available evidence, including three-dimensional reconstructions and computer simulations that aimed to determine the bullet paths and the positions of the shooter or shooters. These reconstructions have provided support for some aspects of the Warren Commission's findings, but have also highlighted inconsistencies that fuel ongoing debate. The forensic examination extended beyond ballistics to include analysis of the Zapruder film, autopsy reports, and the president's clothing. The placement of bullet holes in Kennedy's garments, for example, provided important clues about the posture and position of the president at the time of the shooting. Discrepancies between the autopsy findings and the doctor's reports at Parkland Hospital added further complexity to the forensic puzzle. Autopsy reports and medical analysis. The autopsy reports and medical analysis of President John F. Kennedy's assassination are pivotal components in the ongoing investigation and debate about what truly happened on November 22, 1963. The autopsy, conducted at Bethesda Naval Hospital, was meant to provide a definitive account of the injuries and cause of death. However, it instead became a source of controversy and speculation that persists to this day. The official autopsy report states that Kennedy suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to the upper back, with the bullet exiting through his throat, and a second, fatal wound to the head. The report supported the Warren Commission's conclusion that the shots were fired from behind, consistent with the position of Lee Harvey Oswald in the Texas School Book Depository. However, critics of the report point to a series of inconsistencies and procedural anomalies that have cast doubt on the findings. One major point of contention is the alleged hurried nature of the autopsy and the lack of forensic expertise among the pathologists, which may have led to oversights in the examination and recording process. Eyewitness accounts from medical professionals at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, where Kennedy was first treated, described a wound to the throat as an entry wound, in contrast to the Bethesda autopsy's conclusion that it was an exit wound. The handling of Kennedy's body and the chain of custody of the autopsy materials also came under scrutiny. Reports that the president's brain, which could have yielded significant forensic evidence, went missing only added to the skepticism surrounding the autopsy's conclusions. Subsequent reevaluations of the autopsy have pointed to discrepancies in the location of the entry wounds, the trajectory of the bullets, and the size and nature of the head wound. Critics argue that these inconsistencies suggest the possibility of additional shots and shooters, challenging the lone gunman theory. Some medical experts, after reviewing the available evidence, have posited that the fatal headshot could have come from the front, which would support the theory of a second shooter on the grassy knoll. The HSCA, in its investigation, enlisted forensic pathologists to review the autopsy findings. Their analysis introduced the notion that a bullet fragment found on the president's stretcher could have originated from a shot that missed, adding to the total number of shots fired beyond what the Warren Commission reported. The HSCA also consulted photographic evidence and X-rays, which led to the conclusion that there was a high probability of a second shooter. Despite these efforts, the HSCA's work was later criticized for its reliance on questionable photographic evidence and for not including the autopsy doctors during the reevaluation process. The committee's findings did, however, underscore the significance of the original autopsy's shortcomings and the need for further scrutiny.